It began with a young man sitting quietly in a Hong Kong hotel room in 2013, staring at the glow of his laptop screen. His name was Edward Snowden, a 29-year-old contractor working for the National Security Agency. For months, he had been collecting secret files, documents that revealed the most extensive surveillance program in human history. What he was about to do would expose the inner workings of the U.S. government, spark global outrage, and forever change the way the world understood privacy in the digital age. Before Snowden's name became known worldwide, he was a quiet, intelligent figure who believed in the ideals of his country. He joined the U.S. Army Reserve at 20, hoping to serve and protect freedom. But an injury cut his military career short, and he turned toward technology, working for the CIA and later for private contractors tied to U.S. intelligence. He excelled in cybersecurity, gaining access to some of the most sensitive systems in the government. As his access deepened, so did his doubts. Snowden began to see things that didn't fit with what he believed about America. He read classified documents describing secret programs that gathered data not just on suspected terrorists, but on millions of ordinary people, citizens of the United States and around the world. Every phone call, email, message, or video chat could be monitored, stored, and analyzed. What troubled him most was that all of it was happening in secret, far from the public eye, with almost no oversight. The roots of this surveillance state went back to the aftermath of the September 11 attacks in 2001. After September 11, the U.S. government rushed to strengthen national security, determined to prevent another tragedy. The Patriot Act, passed swiftly by Congress, gave intelligence agencies broad powers to collect and analyze data to detect potential threats. Initially, it was meant to track terrorist communications, but over the years, the scope expanded dramatically. What started as counterterrorism evolved into a massive system of digital surveillance. The NSA, America's most secretive intelligence agency, had long focused on foreign communications, but now its reach extended deep into domestic life. Using new technologies and legal loopholes, it began collecting data directly from major tech companies, telephone networks, and internet service providers. Programs like PRISM allowed the agency to access emails, photos, and chats from services like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Apple. Another program, called Upstream, tapped directly into the backbone of the Internet, collecting data as it flowed through global networks. To most Americans, none of this was visible. They went about their daily lives, unaware that nearly everything they did online was potentially recorded in a government database. Within the intelligence community, however, some analysts grew uneasy. They saw the line between national security and mass surveillance blur. But few dared to speak out. When the first stories hit the headlines, the reaction around the world was immediate and fierce. Governments, journalists, and citizens demanded answers. Leaders who had long trusted the United States were outraged to discover their private communications had been monitored. Across Europe, Latin America, and Asia, politicians summoned U.S. ambassadors for explanations. Protesters took to the streets, carrying signs that read, "Stop watching us." For years, the U.S. government had claimed its surveillance programs were narrowly focused on terrorism. But Snowden's documents told a different story. They revealed that the NSA was collecting billions of communications each day, not just from suspected terrorists, but from ordinary people everywhere. The agency had built tools to track where people went, who they talked to, what they searched online, and even what they bought. The justification was national security, but the scale looked more like global monitoring. One of the programs Snowden exposed was called XKeyscore. It was described in NSA training slides as the widest-reaching system for collecting online data. With XKeyscore, an analyst could type in an email address or keyword and instantly see emails, chats, browsing histories, or social media activity connected to that search. The system could pull data from almost any part of the Internet. Snowden described it bluntly: "I, sitting at my desk, could wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge or even the president, if I had a personal email." The revelation sparked a global debate about power, privacy, and the limits of government surveillance. Some defended the NSA's actions, saying the programs had prevented terrorist attacks and saved lives. But evidence to support those claims was thin. Intelligence officials pointed to only a handful of cases that might have been influenced by mass surveillance, and even those were disputed. Critics argued that the dragnet approach was ineffective and dangerous, giving the government too much control over people's personal information. In the United States, the conversation turned inward. Americans were forced to confront something they had never really considered, that their own government was collecting their data on an unprecedented scale. The idea that freedom and privacy were fundamental rights was suddenly uncertain. Talk shows, editorials, and dinner-table conversations revolved around one question: had the line between protection and control already been crossed? President Barack Obama tried to calm the outrage. In public statements, he insisted that the programs were carefully monitored and authorized by all three branches of government. He said that nobody was listening to your phone calls, but rather analyzing metadata, numbers, times, and durations of calls, to identify patterns that might reveal terrorist activity. Still, as more documents surfaced, that reassurance lost credibility. The NSA wasn't just collecting. When the storm of revelations began to settle, the world found itself in a new digital reality, one shaped not by the promises of technology, but by its hidden costs. Edward Snowden was living in exile, but his name had become a symbol of conscience, courage, and controversy. Governments were still grappling with the aftermath, and citizens everywhere were left questioning how much of their private lives belonged to them anymore. In the years that followed, the debate over surveillance evolved from a political scandal into a global moral question. Could a democracy truly survive if its people were constantly watched? Could trust in government exist when so much was done in secret? The NSA scandal had cracked open a conversation that refused to close. Inside Washington, the intelligence community continued to defend its work. Officials argued that mass data collection was necessary in a world of cyber threats, terrorism, and shifting global power. They said that the programs had been misunderstood, that metadata was not the same as listening in on private conversations, and that safeguards existed to prevent misuse. Yet even within the agencies themselves, the conversation was changing. Some analysts admitted that the scope of surveillance had grown too large to control. What had begun as a tool to fight terrorism had become a vast machine capable of recording the daily lives of billions. Internationally, the fallout was equally profound. Countries once considered close allies began rethinking their intelligence partnerships. Germany, Brazil, and France called for greater digital independence from the United States. The European Union began implementing stricter privacy regulations, while activists pushed for stronger encryption and transparency from tech companies. The Snowden revelations didn't just expose the NSA, they sparked a worldwide movement demanding control over personal data. Tech giants, once complacent, now saw privacy as a business necessity. Companies that had once cooperated quietly with surveillance programs began to rebrand themselves as defenders of user rights. Apple's CEO, Tim Cook, famously declared that privacy was a fundamental human right. Encryption became standard in messaging apps like WhatsApp, Signal, and iMessage. Google and Facebook, under pressure, offered new security settings, though their own business models still thrived on collecting user data. In 2016, a U.S. federal court ruled that the NSA's bulk collection of phone metadata was illegal. The court's decision was largely symbolic. The program had already been restructured, but it represented a rare moment of accountability. Privacy advocates celebrated, while others noted that the system had merely changed form. Instead of collecting the data directly, the NSA could now request it from phone companies on demand. The surveillance machine had learned to adapt. Snowden's personal story also continued to unfold. Living in Russia, he was granted temporary